Day the 6th. Here beginth, the 6th day of the Decameron, wherein under the governance of Eliza is discoursed of whoso being assailed, with some jibing speech hath vindicated himself, or hath with some ready reply or advisement escaped loss, peril, or shame. The moon, being now in the middest heaven, had lost its radiance, and every part of our world was bright with the new coming light. When, the queen arising and letting call her company, they all with slow step fared forth and rambled over the dewy grass to a little distance from the fair hill, holding various discourse of one thing and another, and debating of the more or less goodliness of the stories told, what while they renewed their laughter at the various adventures related therein. Till such time as the sun, mounting high and beginning to wax hot, it seemed well to them all to turn homeward. Wherefore, reversing their steps, they returned to the palace, and there, by the queen's commandment, the tables being already laid and everything strewn with sweet-scented herbs and fair flowers, they addressed themselves to eat, ere the heat should grow greater. This being joyously accomplished, ere they did otherwhat, they sang divers goodly and pleasant canzonets, after which some went to sleep, whilst some sat down to play at chess, and other some at tables, and Dionio fell to singing, in concert with Loretta, of Troilus and Cressida. Then, the hour come for their reassembling after the wonted fashion, they all, being summoned on the part of the queen, seated themselves, as of their usance, about the fountain. But, as she was about to call for the first story, there befell a thing that had not yet befallen there, to wit, that a great clamor was heard by her and by all, made by the wenches and serving men in the kitchen. Footnote 294, lit. For their returning to consistory, del dovra consistoro tornare. The seneschal, being called and questioned who it was that cried thus, and what might be the occasion of the turmoil, answered that the clamor was between Lysiska and Tindaro, but that he knew not the cause thereof, being but then come thither to make them bide quiet, weenas he had been summoned on her part. The queen bade him incontinent fetch thither the two offenders, and they being come, enquired what was the cause of their clamor. Whereto Tindaro offering to reply, Lysiska, who was well in years and somewhat overmasterful, being heated with the outcry she had made, turned to him with an angry air and said, "Mark this brute of a man who dareth to speak before me, whereas I am. Let me speak." Then, turning again to the queen, "Madam," quoth she, "this fellow would teach me, forsooth, to know Sycophante's wife, and neither more nor less than as if I had not been familiar with her, would fain give me to believe that, the first night her husband lay with her, Squire Mall made his entry into Black Hill by force and with effusion of blood. And I say that it is not true. Nay, he entered there in peace, and to the great contentment of those within. Marry, this fellow is simple enough to believe wenches to be such ninnies that they stand to lose their time, abiding the commodity of their fathers and brothers, who 6 times out of 7 tarry 3 or 4 years more than they should to marry them. Well would they fare, forsooth, were they to wait so long. By Christ his faith, and I should know what I say, when I swear thus, I have not a single gossip who went a maid to her husband. And as for the wives, I know full well how many and what tricks they play their husbands, and this blockhead would teach me to know women, as if I had been born yesterday." What while Lysiska spoke, the ladies kept up such a laughing that you might have drawn all their teeth, and the queen imposed silence upon her a good 6 times, but to no purpose. She stinted not till she had said her say. When she had at last made an end of her talk, the queen turned to Dionio and said, laughing, "Dionio, this is a matter for thy jurisdiction. Wherefore, when we shall have made an end of our stories, thou shalt proceed to give final judgment thereon." Whereto he answered promptly, "Madam, the judgment is already given, without hearing more of the matter. And I say that Lysiska is in the right, and opine that it is even as she saith, and that Tindaro is an ass." Lysiska, hearing this, fell a-laughing, and turning to Tindaro said, "I told thee so, begone, and God go with thee. Thinkest thou knowest better than I, thou whose eyes are not yet dry? Gramercy, I have not lived here below for nothing, no, not I." And had not the queen with an angry air imposed silence on her, and sent her and Tindaro away, bidding her make no more words or clamor, and she would not be flogged, they had not to do all that day but attend to her. When they were gone, the queen called on Philomna to make a beginning with the day's stories, and she blithely began thus. Footnote 297, i.e., who are yet a child, in modern parlance, thou whose lips are yet wet with thy mother's milk. The first story. A gentleman engagth to Madame Oretta to carry her a horseback, with a story, but, telling it disorderly, is prayed by her to set her down again. Young ladies, like as stars in the clear nights, are the ornaments of the heavens and the flowers and the leaf-clad shrubs, in the spring, of the green fields and the hillsides. Even so are praiseworthy manners and goodly discourse adorned by sprightly sallies. The which, for that they are brief, beseem women yet better than men, inasmuch as much speaking is more forbidden to the former than to the latter. Yet true it is, whatever the cause, whether it be the meanness of our understanding or some particular grudge borne by heaven to our times, that there be nowadays few or no women left who know how to say a witty word in due season, or who, and it be said to them, know how to apprehend it as it behoveth, the which is a general reproach to our whole sex. However, for that enough hath been said aforetime on the subject by Pampinea, I purpose to say no more thereof. But, to give you to understand how much goodliness there is in witty sayings, when spoken in due season, it pleaseth me to recount to you the courteous fashion in which a lady imposed silence upon a gentleman. Footnote 299, see ante p. 43, Introduction to the last story of the first day. As many of you ladies may either know by sight or have heard tell, there was not long since in our city a noble and well-bred and well-spoken gentlewoman, whose worth merited not that her name be left unsaid. She was called then Madame Oretta, and was the wife of Messer Jerry Spina. She chanced to be, as we are in the country going from place to place, by way of diversion, with a company of ladies and gentlemen, whom she had that day entertained to dinner at her house. And the way being belike somewhat long from the place whence they set out to that whither they were all purposed to go afoot, one of the gentlemen said to her, Madame Oretta, an you will, I will carry you a horseback great part of the way we have to go with one of the finest stories in the world. Nay, sir, answered the lady, I pray you instantly thereof. Indeed, it will be most agreeable to me. Master Cavalier, who maybe fared no better, sword at side than tail on tongue, hearing this, began a story of his, which of itself was in truth very goodly. But he, now thrice or four or even half a dozen times repeating one same word, anon turning back and while saying, I said not aright, and often erring in the names and putting one for another, marred it cruelly, more by token that he delivered himself exceedingly ill, having regard to the quality of the persons and the nature of the incidents of his tale. By reason whereof, Madame Oretta, hearkening to him, was many a time taken with a sweat and failing of the heart, as she were sick and near her end, and at last, being unable to brook the thing any more, and seeing the gentleman engaged in an imbroglio from which he was not like to extricate himself, she said to him pleasantly, Sir, this horse of yours hath too hard a trot, wherefore I pray you be pleased to set me down. The gentleman, who, as it chanced, understood a hint better than he told a story, took the jest in good part, and turning it off with a laugh, fell to discoursing of other matters, and left unfinished the story that he had begun and conducted so ill. The second story. Cisti the baker with a word of his fashion maketh Messer Jerry Spina sensible of an indiscreet request of his. Madame Oretta's saying was greatly commended of all, ladies and men, and the queen bidding Pampinea follow on, she began thus. Fair ladies, I know not of mine own motion to resolve me which is the more at fault, whether nature in fitting to a noble soul a mean body or fortune in imposing a mean condition upon a body endowed with a noble soul, as in one our townsman Cisti, and in many another we may have seen it happen, which Cisti being gifted with a very lofty spirit, fortune made him a baker. And for this, certes, I should curse both nature and fortune like, did I not know the one to be most discreet, and the other to have 1,000 eyes, albeit fools picture her blind. And I imagine, therefore, that, being exceeding well advised, they do that which is oftentimes done of human beings, who, uncertain of future events, bury their most precious things, against their occasions, in the meanest places of their houses, as being the least suspect, and thence bring them forth in their greatest needs, the mean place having the while kept them more surely than would the goodly chamber. And so, meseemeth, do the governors of the world hide oftentimes their most precious things under the shadow of crafts and conditions reputed most mean, to the end that, bringing them forth therefrom in time of need, their luster may show the brighter. Which how Sisti the baker made manifest, though in but a trifling matter, restoring to Messer Jerry Spina, whom the story but now told of Madame Moretta, who was his wife, hath recalled to my memory the eyes of the understanding. It pleaseth me to show you in a very short story. I must tell you then that Pope Boniface, with whom Messer Jerry Spina was in very great favor, having dispatched to Florence certain of his gentlemen on an embassy concerning sundry important matters of his, they lighted down at the house of Messer Jerry, and he treating the Pope's affairs in company with them. It chanced, whatever might have been the occasion thereof, that he and they passed well nigh every morning afoot before Santa Maria Ughai, where Sisti the baker had his bakehouse and plied his craft in person. Now, albeit fortune had appointed Sisti a humble enough condition, she had so far at the least been kind to him therein that he was grown very rich, and without ever choosing to abandon it for any other, lived very splendidly, having, amongst his other good things, the best wines, white and red, that were to be found in Florence or in the neighboring country. Seeing Messer Jerry and the Pope's ambassadors pass every morning before his door, and the heat being great, he bethought himself that it were a great courtesy to give them to drink of his good white wine. But, having regard to his own condition and that of Messer Jerry, he deemed it not a seemly thing to presume to invite them, but determined to bear himself on such wise as should lead Messer Jerry to invite himself. Accordingly, having still on his body a very white doublet and an apron fresh from the wash, which bespoke him rather a miller than a baker, he let set before his door every morning, towards the time when he looked for Messer Jerry and the ambassadors to pass, a new tinned pail of fair water and a small pitcher of new bolognese, where, full of his good white wine, together with 2 beakers, which seemed of silver, so bright they were, and seated himself there, against they should pass, when, after clearing his throat once or twice, he fell to drinking of that his wine with such a relish that he had made a dead man's mouth water for it. Messer Jerry, having seen him do thus 1 and 2 mornings, said on the 3rd, "How now, Sisti? Is it good?" Whereupon he started to his feet and said, "Aye is it, sir, but how good I cannot give you to understand, except you taste thereof." Messer Jerry, in whom either the nature of the weather or belike the relish with which he saw Sisti drink had begotten a thirst, turned to the ambassadors and said, smiling, "Gentlemen, we shall do well to taste this honest man's wine, belike it is such that we shall not repent thereof." Accordingly, he made with them towards Sisti, who let bring a goodly settle out of his bakehouse, and praying them sit, said to their serving men, who pressed forward to rinse the beakers, "Stand back, friends, and leave this office to me, for that I know no less well how to skink than to wield the baking peel, and look you not to taste a drop thereof." So saying, he with his own hands washed out 4 new and goodly beakers, and letting bring a little pitcher of his good wine, busied himself with giving Messer Jerry and his companions to drink, to whom the wine seemed the best they had drunk in that great while. Wherefore they commended it greatly, and well nigh every morning, whilst the ambassadors abode there, Messer Jerry went thither to drink in company with them. After a while, their business being dispatched, and they about to depart, Messer Jerry made them a magnificent banquet, whereto he bade a number of the most worshipful citizens, and amongst the rest, Sisti, who would, however, on no condition go thither. Whereupon Messer Jerry bade one of his serving men go fetch a flask of the baker's wine, and give each guest a half beaker thereof with the first course. The servant, despiteful most like for that he had never availed to drink of the wine, took a great flagon, which when Sisti saw, "My son," said he, "Messer Jerry sent thee not to me." The man avouched again and again that he had, but getting none other answer, returned to Messer Jerry and reported it to him. Quoth he, "Go back to him and tell him that I do indeed send thee to him, and if he still make thee the same answer, ask him to whom I send thee." Accordingly, the servant went back to the baker and said to him, "Sisti, for certain Messer Jerry sendeth me to thee and none other." "For certain, my son," answered the baker, "he doth it not." "Then," said the man, "to whom doth he send me?" "To the Arno," replied Sisti, which answer when the servant reported to Messer Jerry, the eyes of his understanding were of a sudden opened, and he said to the man, "Let me see what flask thou carriedst thither." When he saw the great flagon aforesaid, he said, "Sisti saith sooth," and giving the man a sharp reproof, made him take a sortable flask, which when Sisti saw, "Now," quoth he, "I know full well that he sendeth thee to me," and cheerfully filled it unto him. Then, that same day, he let fill a little cask with the like wine, and causing carry it softly to Messer Jerry's house, went presently thither, and finding him there, said to him, Sir, I would not have you think that the great flagon of this morning frightened me. Nay, but meseeming that which I have of these past days shown you with my little pitchers had escaped your mind, to wit, that this is no household wine, I wish to recall it to you. But now, for that I purpose no longer to be your steward thereof, I have sent it all to you, henceforward do with it as it pleaseth you. Messer Jerry set great store by Siste's present, and rendering him such thanks as he deemed sortable, ever after held him for a man of great worth and for friend. Footnote 300, lit. Family wine, vin de famiglia, i.e. no wine for servants or general drinking, but a choice vintage, to be reserved for special occasions. The third story. Madame Nana de Pulci, with a ready retort to a not altogether seemly pleasantry, imposteth silence on the Bishop of Florence. Pampinea having made an end of her story, and both Siste's reply, and his liberality having been much commended of all, it pleased the queen that the next story should be told by Loretta, who blithely began as follows. Jocund ladies, first Pampinea and now Philomena have spoken truly enough touching our little worth and the excellence of pithy sayings, whereto that there may be no need now to return, I would fain remind you, over and above that which hath been said on the subject, that the nature of smart sayings is such that they should bite upon the hearer, not as the dog, but as the sheep biteth. For that, and a trait bit like a dog, it were not a trait, but an affront. The right mean in this was excellently well hit both by Madame Oretta's speech and Siste's reply. It is true that, if a smart thing be said by way of retort, and the answer biteth like a dog, having been bitten on likewise, meseemeth he is not to be blamed as he would have been, had this not been the case. Wherefore it behoveth us look how and with whom, no less than when and where, we bandy jests. To which considerations, a prelate of ours, taking too little heed, received at least as sharp a bite as he thought to give, as I shall show you in a little story. Messer Antonio d'Orso, a learned and worthy prelate, being Bishop of Florence, there came thither a Catalan gentleman, called Messer Diego della Rata, marshal for King Robert, who, being a man of a very fine person and a great amorist, took a liking to one among other Florentine ladies, a very fair lady and granddaughter to a brother of the said bishop, and hearing that her husband, albeit a man of good family, was very sordid and miserly, agreed with him to give him 500 gold florins, so he would suffer him lie a night with his wife. Accordingly, he let gild so many silver poplins, a coin which was then current, and having lain with the lady, though against her will, gave them to the husband. The thing after coming to be known everywhere, the sordid wretch of a husband reaped both loss and scorn, but the bishop, like a discreet man as he was, affected to know nothing of the matter. Wherefore, he and the marshal consorting much together, it chanced, as they rode side by side with each other, one St. John's day, viewing the ladies on either side of the way where the mantle is run for, the prelate espied a young lady of whom this present pestilence hath bereft us, and whom all you ladies must have known, Madame Nana de Pulci by name, cousin to Messer Alessio Ranucci, a fresh and fair young woman, both well-spoken and high-spirited. Then not long before married in Porta San Piero, and pointed her out to the marshal. Then, being near her, he laid his hand on the latter's shoulder and said to her, Nana, how deemest thou of this gallant? Thinkest thou couldst make a conquest of him? It seemed to the lady that those words somewhat trenched upon her honor and were like to sully it in the eyes of those, and there were many there who heard them. Wherefore, not thinking to purge away the soil, but to return blow for blow, she promptly answered, Maybe, sir, he would not make a conquest of me, but in any case I should want good money. The marshal and the bishop, hearing this, felt themselves alike touched to the quick by her speech. The one as the author of the cheat put upon the bishop's brother's granddaughter, and the other as having suffered the affront in the person of his kinswoman, and made off, shamefast and silent, without looking at one another or saying aught more to her that day. Thus, then, the young lady having been bitten, it was not forbidden her to bite her biter with a retort. Footnote 301. A silver coin of about the size and value of our silver penny, which, when gilded, would pass muster well enough for a gold florin, unless closely examined. Footnote 302. Il Palio, a race anciently run at Florence on St. John's Day, as that of the Barbary at Rome during the Carnival. The fourth story. Chichibio, cook to currado gianfigiliazzi, with a ready word spoken to save himself. Turneth his master's anger into laughter and escapth, the punishment threatened him by the latter. Loretta being silent, and Nana having been mightily commended of all, the queen charged Nephil to follow on, and she said, Although, lovesome ladies, a ready wit doth often furnish folk with words both prompt and useful and goodly, according to the circumstances, yet fortune whiles cometh to the help of the fearful and putteth of a sudden into their mouths such answers as might never of malice aforethought be found of the speaker, as I purpose to show you by my story. Corrado Gianfigliazzi, as each of you ladies may have both heard and seen, hath still been a noble citizen of our city, liberal and magnificent, and leading a knightly life, hath ever, letting be for the present his weightier doings, taken delight in hawks and hounds. Having one day with a falcon of his brought down a crane, and finding it young and fat, he sent it to a good cook he had, a Venetian hight Chichibio, bidding him roast it for supper and dress it well. Chichibio, who looked the new-caught gull he was, trussed the crane and setting it to the fire, proceeded to cook it diligently. When it was all but done and gave out a very savory smell, it chanced that a wench of the neighborhood, Brunetta by name, of whom Chichibio was sore enamored, entered the kitchen and smelling the crane and seeing it, instantly besought him to give her a thigh thereof. He answered her singing and said, Thou shalt not have it from me, Mistress Brunetta, thou shalt not have it from me. Whereat she, being vexed, said to him, By God his faith, and thou give it me not, thou shalt never have of me aught that shall pleasure thee. In brief, many were the words between them, and at last, Chichibio, not to anger his mistress, cut off one of the thighs of the crane and gave it her. The bird being after set before Messer Corrado and certain stranger guests of his, lacking a thigh, and the former marveling thereat, he let call Chichibio and asked him what was come of the other thigh, whereto the liar of a Venetian answered without hesitation, Sir, cranes have but one thigh and one leg. What a devil! Cried Corrado in a rage. They have but one thigh and one leg. Have I never seen a crane before? Sir, replied Chichibio, it is as I tell you, and ween as it pleaseth you, I will cause you see it in the quick. Corrado, out of regard for the strangers he had with him, chose not to make more words of the matter, but said, Since thou say'st thou wilt cause me see it in the quick, a thing I never yet saw or heard tell of, I desire to see it tomorrow morning, in which case I shall be content. But I swear to thee, by Christ his body, that, and it be otherwise, I will have thee served on such wise that thou shalt still have cause to remember my name to thy sorrow so long as thou livest. There was an end of the talk for that night. But next morning, as soon as it was day, Corrado, whose anger was nothing abated for sleep, arose, still full of wrath, and bade bring the horses. Then, mounting Chichibio upon a rouncy, he carried him off towards a watercourse, on whose banks cranes were still to be seen at break of day, saying, We shall soon see who lied yesterev, thou or I. Chichibio, seeing that his master's wrath yet endured, and that needs must be made good his lie, and knowing not how he should avail thereunto, rode after Corrado in the greatest fright that might be, and fain would he have fled, so but he might. But seeing no way of escape, he looked now before him, and now behind and now on either side, and took all he saw for cranes standing on 2 feet. Presently, coming near to the river, he chanced to catch sight, before any other, of a round dozen of cranes on the bank, all perched on one leg, as they used to do when they sleep. Whereupon he straightway showed them to Corrado, saying, Now, sir, if you look at those that stand yonder, you may very well see that I told you the truth yesternight, to wit, that cranes have but one thigh and one leg. Corrado, seeing them, answered, Wait, and I will show thee that they have two, and going somewhat nearer to them, he cried out, Ho! Ho! At this the cranes, putting down the other leg, all after some steps took to flight, whereupon Corrado said to him, How say'st thou now, malapert knave that thou art? Deemest thou they have 2 legs? Chichibio, all confounded and knowing not whether he stood on his head or his heels, answered, Aye, sir, but you did not cry, Ho! Ho! To yesternight's crane. Had you cried thus, it would have put out the other thigh and the other leg, even as did those yonder. This reply so tickled Corrado that all his wrath was changed into mirth and laughter, and he said, Chichibio, thou art in the right, indeed, I should have done it. Thus, then, with his prompt and comical answer did Cicibio avert ill luck and made his peace with his master. The fifth story. Messer Forceda and Master Giotto the painter coming from Mugello, each jestingly rallith the other on his scurvy favor. Neefle being silent, and the ladies having taken much pleasure in Cicibio's reply, Pamphilo, by the queen's desire, spoke thus: Dearest ladies, it chanceth often that, like as fortune whiles hideth very great treasures of worth and virtue under mean conditions, as hath been a little before shown by Pampinea, even so, under the sorriest of human forms are marvelous wits found to have been lodged by nature. And this very plainly appeared in two townsmen of ours, of whom I purpose briefly to entertain you. For that the one, who was called Messer Forceda Rabata, though little of person and misshapen, with a flat cammy's face, that had been an eyesore on the shoulders of the foulest cadger in Florence, was yet of such excellence in the interpretation of the laws, that he was of many men of worth reputed a very treasury of civil right. Whilst the other, whose name was Giotto, had so excellent a genius that there was nothing of all which nature, mother and mover of all things, presenteth unto us by the ceaseless revolution of the heavens, but he with pencil and pen and brush depicted it, and that so closely that not like, nay, but rather the thing itself it seemed, insomuch that men's visual sense is found to have been oftentimes deceived in things of his fashion, taking that for real which was but depictured. Wherefore, he having brought back to the light this art, which had for many an age lain buried under the errors of certain folk, who painted more to divert the eyes of the ignorant than to please the understanding of the judicious, he may deservedly be styled one of the chief glories of Florence, the more so that he bore the honors he had gained with the utmost humility, and although, while he lived, chief over all else in his art, he still refused to be called master, which title, though rejected by him, shone so much the more gloriously in him, as it was with greater eagerness greedily usurped by those who knew less than he, or by his disciples. Yet, great as was his skill, he was not therefore anywise goodlier of person or better favored than Messer Forceda. But to come to my story, I must tell you that Messer Forceda and Giotto had each his country house at Mugello, and the former, having gone to visit his estates, at that season of the summer when the courts hold holiday, and returning thence on a sorry cart horse, chanced to fall in with the aforesaid Giotto, who had been on the same errand, and was then on his way back to Florence nowise better equipped than himself in horse and accoutrements. Accordingly, they joined company and fared on softly, like old men as they were. Presently, it chanced, as we often see it happen in summer time, that a sudden shower overtook them, from which, as quickly as they might, they took shelter in the house of a husbandman, a friend and acquaintance of both of them. After a while, the rain showing no sign of giving over and they wishing to reach Florence by daylight, they borrowed of their host 2 old homespun cloaks and 2 hats, rusty with age, for that there were no better to be had, and set out again upon their way. When they had gone a while, and were all drenched and bemired with the splashing that their hackneys kept up with their hoofs things, which used not to add worship to anyone's, looks the weather began to clear a little, and the 2 wayfarers, who had long fared on in silence, fell to conversing together. Messer Forceda, as he rode, hearkening to Giotto, who was a very fine talker, fell to considering his companion from head to foot, and seeing him everywise so ill accoutred, and in such scurvy case, burst out laughing, and without taking any thought to his own plight, said to him, "How sayst thou, Giotto? And there encountered us here a stranger who had never seen thee. Thinkest thou he would believe thee to be, as thou art, the finest painter in the world?" "Aye, sir," answered Giotto forthright, "methinketh he might e'en believe it weenas, looking upon you, he should believe that you knew your AB 100. Messer Forceda, hearing this, was sensible of his error, and saw himself paid with money such as the wares he had sold. The sixth story. Micle Scalza Provth, to certain young men, that the cadgers of Florence are the best gentlemen of the world, or the Maremma and Wnth, a supper. The ladies yet laughed at Giotto's prompt retort, when the queen charged Fiammetta follow on, and she proceeded to speak thus. Young ladies, the mention by Pamphilo of the cadgers of Florence, whom peradventure you know not as doth he, hath brought to my mind a story, wherein, without deviating from our appointed theme, it is demonstrated how great is their nobility, and it pleaseth me, therefore, to relate it. It is no great while since there was in our city a young man called Michel Scalza, who was the merriest and most agreeable man in the world, and he had still the rarest stories in hand. Wherefore the young Florentines were exceeding glad to have his company weenas, they made a party of pleasure amongst themselves. It chanced one day, he being with certain folk at Monte Ughi, that the question was started among them of who were the best and oldest gentlemen of Florence. Some said the Uberty, others the Lamberty, and one this family and another that, according as it occurred to his mind. Which Scalza hearing, he fell a-laughing and said, "Go to, addle-pates that you are. You know not what you say. The best gentlemen and the oldest, not only of Florence, but of all the world or the Maremma, are the cadgers, a matter upon which all the Fisipolers and every one who knoweth them, as I do, are of accord. And lest you should understand it of others, I speak of the cadgers your neighbors of Santa Maria Maggiore." Footnote 305. A commentator notes that the adjunction to the world of the Maremma, cf. Elijah Goff, the Irish question has for some centuries been enjoyed by the universe and other parts, produces a risible effect, and gives the reader to understand that Scalza broaches the question only by way of a joke. The same may be said of the jesting inversion of the word philosophers, Fisipolers, Fisifali, in the next line. Footnote 306. Baranci, the Florentine name for what we should call professional beggars, mumpers, chanters, and Abrahaman, called Bari and Baraxai in other parts of Italy. This story has been a prodigious stumbling block to former translators, not one of whom appears to have had the slightest idea of Boccaccio's meaning. When the young men, who looked for him to say otherwhat, heard this, they all made mock of him and said, "Thou gullest us, as if we knew not the cadgers even as thou dost." "By the evangels," replied Scalza, "I gull you not, nay, I speak the truth, and if there be any here who will lay a supper thereon, to be given to the winner and half a dozen companions of his choosing, I will willingly hold the wager, and I will do yet more for you, for I will abide by the judgment of whomsoever you will." Quoth one of them, called Neri Manini, "I am ready to try to win the supper in question." Whereupon, having agreed together to take Piero di Fiorentino, in whose house they were, to judge, they betook themselves to him, followed by all the rest, who looked to see Scalza lose and to make merry over his discomfiture, and recounted to him all that had passed. Piero, who was a discreet young man, having first heard Neri's argument, turned to Scalza and said to him, "And thou, how canst thou prove this that thou affirmest?" "How sayest thou?" answered Scalza. "Nay, I will prove it by such reasoning that not only thou, but he who denieth it, shall acknowledge that I speak sooth. You know that the ancienter men are, the nobler they are, and so was it said but now among these. Now the cadgers are more ancient than anyone else, so that they are nobler. And showing you how they are the most ancient, I shall undoubtedly have won the wager. You must know, then, that the cadgers were made by God the Lord in the days when he first began to learn to draw. But the rest of mankind were made after he knew how to draw. And to assure yourselves that in this I say sooth, do but consider the cadgers in comparison with other folk. Whereas you see all the rest of mankind with faces well composed and duly proportioned, you may see the cadgers, this with a visnomy very long and straight, and with a face out of all measure broad. One hath too long and another too short a nose, and a third hath a chin jutting out and turned upward and huge jawbones that show as they were those of an ass. While some there be who have one eye bigger than the other, and other some who have one set lower than the other, like the faces that children used to make, weenas they first begin to learn to draw. Wherefore, as I have already said, it is abundantly apparent that God the Lord made them, what time he was learning to draw, so that they are more ancient and consequently nobler than the rest of mankind. At this, both Piero, who was the judge, and Neri, who had wagered the supper, and all the rest, hearing Scalza's comical argument and remembering themselves, fell all a-laughing and affirmed that he was in the right and had won the supper, for that the cadgers were assuredly the noblest and most ancient gentlemen that were to be found not in Florence alone, but in the world or the Maremma. Wherefore it was very justly said of Pamphilo, seeking to show the foulness of Messer Forza's visnomy, that it would have showed notably ugly on one of the cadgers. The seventh story. Madame Philippa, being found by her husband with a lover of hers and brought to justice, Delivreth herself, with a prompt and pleasant answer, and causeth, modify the statute. Fiametta was now silent, and all laughed yet at the novel argument used by Scalza for the ennoblement over all of the cadgers, when the queen enjoined Philostrato to tell, and he accordingly began to say, "It is everywise a fine thing, noble ladies, to know how to speak well. But I hold it yet goodlier to know how to do it whereas necessity requireth it, even as a gentlewoman, of whom I purpose to entertain you, knew well how to do on such wise that not only did she afford her hearers matter for mirth and laughter, but did herself loose from the toils of an ignominious death, as you shall presently hear. There was, then, aforetime, in the city of Prato, a statute in truth no less blameworthy than cruel, which, without making any distinction, ordained that any woman found by her husband in adultery with any her lover should be burnt, even as she who should be discovered to have sold her favors for money. But while this statute was in force, it befell that a noble and beautiful lady, by name Madame Philippa, who was of a singularly amorous complexion, was one night found by Rinaldo de Pugliese, her husband, in her own chamber in the arms of Lazzarino de Guazagliatri, a noble and handsome youth of that city, whom she loved even as herself. Rinaldo, seeing this, was sore enraged, and scarce contained himself from falling upon them and slaying them. And but that he feared for himself, and he should ensue the promptings of his anger, he had certainly done it. However, he forbore from this, but could not refrain from seeking of the law of Prato that which it was not permitted him to accomplish with his own hand, to wit, the death of his wife. Having, therefore, very sufficient evidence to prove the lady's default, no sooner was the day come than, without taking other counsel, he lodged an accusation against her and caused summon her before the provost. Madame Philippa, being great of heart, as women commonly are who are verily in love, resolved, although counseled to the contrary by many of her friends and kinsfolk, to appear, choosing rather, confessing the truth, to die with an undaunted spirit, than meanly fleeing, to live an outlaw in exile, and confess herself unworthy of such a lover as he in whose arms she had been the foregoing night. Wherefore, presenting herself before the provost, attended by a great company of men and ladies, and exhorted of all to deny the charge, she demanded, with a firm voice and an assured air, what he would with her. The magistrate, looking upon her, and seeing her very fair and commendable of carriage and according as her words testified, of a lofty spirit, began to have compassion of her, fearing lest she should confess somewhat wherefore it should behoove him, for his own honor's sake, condemn her to die. However, having no choice but to question her of that which was laid to her charge, he said to her, "Madam, as you see, here is Rinaldo your husband, who complaineth of you, avouching himself to have found you in adultery with another man, and demanding that I should punish you therefore by putting you to death, according to the tenor of a statute which here obtaineth. But this I cannot do, except you confess it. Wherefore look well what you answer, and tell me if that be true whereof your husband impeacheth you." The lady, nowise dismayed, replied very cheerfully, "Sir, true it is that Rinaldo is my husband, and that he found me last night in the arms of Lazzarino, wherein, for the great and perfect love I bear him, I have many a time been, nor am I anywise minded to deny this. But as am assured you know, laws should be common to all and made with the consent of those whom they concern. And this is not the case with this statute, which is binding only upon us unhappy women, who might far better than men avail to satisfy many. More by token that, when it was made, not only did no woman yield consent thereunto, but none of us was even cited to do so, wherefore it may justly be styled naught. However, and you choose, to the prejudice of my body and of your own soul, to be the executor of this unrighteous law, it resteth with you to do so. But, ere you proceed to adjudge aught, I pray you do me one slight favor, to wit, that you question my husband if at all times and as often as it pleased him, without ever saying him nay, I have or not vouchsafed him entire commodity of myself." Rinaldo, without waiting to be questioned of the provost, straightway made answer that undoubtedly the lady had, at his every request, accorded him his every pleasure of herself. Whereupon, "Then, my lord provost," straightway rejoined she, "if ye have still taken of me that which was needful and pleasing to him, what, I ask you, was or am I to do with that which remaineth over and above his requirements? Should I cast it to the dogs? Was it not far better to gratify withal a gentleman who loveth me more than himself, than to leave it waste or spoil. Now well nigh all the people of Prato had flocked thither to the trial of such a matter and of so fair and famous a lady, and hearing so comical a question, they all, after much laughter, cried out as with one voice that she was in the right of it, and that she said well. Moreover, ere they departed thence, at the instance of the provost, they modified the cruel statute, and left it to apply to those women only who should for money make default to their husbands. Thereupon Rinaldo, having taken naught but shame by so fond an emprise, departed the court, and the lady returned in triumph to her own house, joyful and free, and in a manner raised up out of the fire. The 8th story. Fresco exhorteth his niece not to mirror herself in the glass. If, as she saith, it irketh her to see disagreeable folk. The story told by Philostrato at first touched the hearts of the listening ladies with some little shamefastness, and they gave token thereof by a modest redness that appeared upon their faces. But after looking one at another, they hearkened thereto, tittering the while and scarce able to abstain from laughing. As soon as he was come to the end thereof, the queen turned to Emilia and bade her follow on, whereupon, sighing no otherwise than as she had been aroused from a dream, she began, "Lovesome lasses, for that long thought hath held me far from here, I shall, to obey our queen, content myself with a story belike much slighter than that which I might have bethought myself to tell, had my mind been present here, recounting to you the silly default of a damsel, corrected by an uncle of hers with a jocular retort. Had she been woman enough to have apprehended it? A certain Fresco de Salatico, then, had a niece familiarly called Ciessa, who, having a comely face and person, though none of those angelical beauties that we have often seen aforetime, set so much store by herself, and accounted herself so noble that she had gotten a habit of carping at both men and women and everything she saw, without anywise taking thought to herself, who was so much more fascious, froward, and humorsome than any other of her sex that nothing could be done to her liking. Beside all this, she was so prideful that, had she been of the blood royal of France, it had been overweening. And when she went abroad, she gave herself so many airs that she did not but make wry faces, as if there came to her a stench from whomsoever she saw or met. But letting be many other vexatious and tiresome fashions of hers, it chanced one day that she came back to the house, where Fresco was, and seating herself near him, all full of airs and grimaces, did nothing but puff and blow, whereupon quoth he, "What meaneth this, Ciessa, that today being a holiday thou comest home so early?" To which she answered, all like to die away with affectation, "It is true I have come back soon, for that I believe there were never in this city so many disagreeable and tiresome people, both men and women, as there are today. There passeth none about the streets but is hateful to me as ill chance, and I do not believe there is a woman in the world to whom it is more irksome to see disagreeable folk than it is to me. Wherefore I have returned thus early, not to see them." "My lass," rejoined Fresco, to whom his niece's airs and graces were mighty displeasing, "if disagreeable folk be so distasteful to thee as thou sayest, never mirror thyself in the glass, so thou wouldst live merry." But she, emptier than a reed, albeit her seemed she was a match for Solomon in wit, apprehended Fresco's true speech no better than a block. Nay, she said that she chose to mirror herself in the glass like other women, and so she abode in her folly and therein abideth yet. The 9th story. Guido Cavalcanti, with a pithy speech courteously flouteth certain Florentine gentlemen who had taken him by surprise. The queen, seeing Emilia delivered of her story, and that it rested with none other than herself to tell, saving him who was privileged to speak last, began thus: "Although, sprightly ladies, you have this day taken out of my mouth at the least 2 stories, whereof I had purposed to relate one, I have yet one left to tell, the end whereof compriseth a saying of such a fashion that none, peradventure, of such pertinence, hath yet been cited to us. You must know, then, that there were in our city, of times past, many goodly and commendable usances, whereof none is left there nowadays, thanks to the avarice that hath waxed therein with wealth, and hath banished them all. Among these there was a custom to the effect that the gentlemen of the various quarters of Florence assembled together in divers places about the town, and formed themselves into companies of a certain number, having a care to admit thereinto such only as might aptly bear the expense, whereof today the one and tomorrow the other, and so all in turn hold open house, each his day, for the whole company. At these banquets they often entertained both stranger gentlemen, whenas there came any thither, and those of the city. And on like wise, once at the least in the year, they clad themselves alike and rode in procession through the city on the most notable days, and whiles they held passes of arms. Especially on the chief holidays or whenas some glad news of victory or the like came to the city. Amongst these companies was one of Messer Beddo Brunelleschi, whereinto the latter and his companions had studied amain to draw Guido, son of Messer Cavalcante de Cavalcanti, and not without cause. For that, besides being one of the best logicians in the world and an excellent natural philosopher, of which things, indeed, they recked little. He was very sprightly and well-bred, and a mighty well-spoken man, and knew better than any other to do everything that he would and that pertained unto a gentleman, more by token that he was very rich and knew wonder, well how to entertain whomsoever he deemed deserving of honor. But Messer Beddo had never been able to win and to have him, and he and his companions believed that this betided for that Guido, being whiles engaged in abstract speculations, became much distraught for mankind. And for that he inclined somewhat to the opinion of the Epicureans. It was reported among the common folk that these his speculations consisted only in seeking if it might be discovered that God was not. It chanced one day that Guido set out from Ordo San Michele and came by way of the Corso diglia Demari, the which was oftentimes his road, to San Giovanni, round about which there were at that present divers great marble tombs, which are nowadays at Santa Reparata, and many others. As he was between the columns of porphyry there, and the tombs in question and the door of the church, which was shut, Messer Beddo and his company, coming a horseback along the Piazza di Santa Reparata, espied him among the tombs and said, "Let us go plague him." Accordingly, spurring their horses, they charged all down upon him in sport, and coming upon him ere he was aware of them, said to him, "Guido, thou refusest to be of our company. But harkye, whenas thou shalt have found that God is not, what wilt thou have accomplished?" Guido, seeing himself hemmed in by them, answered promptly, "Gentlemen, you may say what you will to me in your own house." Then, laying his hand on one of the great tombs aforesaid and being very nimble of body, he took a spring and alighting on the other side, made off, having thus rid himself of them. The gentlemen abode looking one upon another and fell saying that he was a crack brain, and that he had answered them amounted to not seeing that there where they were they had no more to do than all the other citizens, nor Guido himself less than any of themselves. But Messer Beddo turned to them and said, "It is you who are the crack-brains, if you have not apprehended him. He hath courteously and in a few words given us the sharpest rebuke in the world. For that, and you consider aright, these tombs are the houses of the dead, seeing they are laid and abide therein, and these, saith he, are our house, meaning thus to show us that we and other foolish and unlettered men are, compared with him and other men of learning, worse than dead folk. Wherefore, being here, we are in our own house." Thereupon each understood what Guido had meant to say, and was abashed nor ever plagued him more, but held Messer Beddo thenceforward a gentleman of a subtle wit and an understanding. The 10th story. Fra Cipolla Promicth, certain country folk to show them one of the angel Gabriel's feathers, and finding coals in place thereof. Avouch these latter to be of those which roasted St. Lawrence. Each of the company being now quit of his story, Dionio perceived that it rested with him to tell. Whereupon, without awaiting more formal commandment, he began on this wise, silence having first been imposed on those who commended Guido's pregnant retort. "Charming ladies, albeit I am privileged to speak of that which most liketh me, I purpose not today to depart from the matter, whereof you have all very aptly spoken. But ensuing in your footsteps, I mean to show you how cunningly a friar of the order of St. Anthony, by name Fra Cipolla, contrived with a sudden shift to extricate himself from a snare which had been set for him by two young men. Nor should it irk you if, for the complete telling of the story, I enlarge somewhat in speaking, and you consider the sun, which is yet a middleward in the sky. Certaldo, as you may have heard, is a burg of Val di Elsa situate in our country, which, small though it be, was once inhabited by gentlemen and men of substance. And thither, for that he found good pasture there, one of the friars of the order of St. Anthony was long used to resort once a year, to get in the alms bestowed by simpletons upon him and his brethren. His name was Fra Cipolla, and he was gladly seen there, no less belike, for his name's sake than for other reasons, seeing that these parts produce onions that are famous throughout all Tuscany. This Fra Cipolla was little of person, red-haired and merry of countenance, the jolliest rascal in the world. And to boot, for all he was no scholar, he was so fine a talker and so ready of wit that those who knew him would not only have esteemed him a great rhetorician, but had avouched him to be Tully himself, or may be Quintilian. And he was gossip, or friend, or well-wisher to well-nigh everyone in the country. Footnote 312. The term well-wisher, benevolent, when understood in relation to a woman, is generally equivalent, at least with the older Italian writers, to lover. See ante passim. One August among others he betook himself thither according to his wont, and on a Sunday morning, all the good men and good wives of the villages around being come to hear mass at the parish church, he came forward, ween as it seemed to him time, and said, Gentlemen and ladies, it is, as you know, your usance to send every year to the poor of our Lord Baron St. Anthony of your corn and of your oats, this little and that much, according to his means and his devoutness, to the intent that the blessed St. Anthony may keep watch over your beeves and asses and swine and sheep. And besides this, you used to pay, especially such of you as are inscribed into our company, that small due which is payable once a year. To collect these I have been sent by my superior, to wit, my Lord Abbot. Wherefore, with the blessing of God, you shall after none, ween as you hear the bells ring, come hither without the church, where I will make preachment to you after the wonted fashion, and you shall kiss the cross. Moreover, for that I know you all to be great devotees of our Lord St. Anthony, I will, as an especial favor, show you a very holy and goodly relic, which I myself brought aforetime from the holy lands beyond seas. And that is one of the angel Gabriel's feathers, which remained in the Virgin Mary's chamber, weenas he came to announce to her in Nazareth. This said, he broke off and went on with his mass. Now, when he said this, there were in the church, among many others, 2 roguish young fellows, hight one Giovanni del Braginiera and the other Biagio Pizzini, who, after laughing with one another a while over Fra Cipolla's relic, took counsel together, for all they were great friends and cronies of his, to play him some trick in the matter of the feather in question. Accordingly, having learned that he was to dine that morning with a friend of his in the burg, they went down into the street as soon as they knew him to be at table, and betook themselves to the inn where he had alighted, purposing that Biagio should hold his servant in parley, whilst Giovanni should search his baggage for the feather aforesaid, whatever it might be, and carry it off, to see what he should say to the people of the matter. Fra Cipolla had a servant, whom some called Guccio Bailna, others Guccio Imbrata, and yet others Guccio Porco, and who was such a scurvy knave that Lipo Topo never wrought his like, inasmuch as his master used oftentimes to jest of him with his cronies and say, My servant hath in him 9 defaults, such that, were one of them in Solomon or Aristotle or Seneca, it would suffice to mar all their worth, all their wit, and all their sanctity. Consider, then, what a man he must be, who hath all 9 of them, and in whom there is neither worth nor wit nor sanctity. Being questioned whiles what were these 9 defaults, and having put them into doggerel rhyme, he would answer, I will tell you. He's a liar, a sloven, a slugabed, disobedient, neglectful, ill-bred, o'erweening, foul-spoken, a dunderhead, beside which he hath divers other peccadillos, whereof it booteth not to speak. But what is most laughable of all his fashions is that, wherever he goeth, he is still for taking a wife and hiring a house. For, having a big, black, greasy beard, him seemeth he is so exceeding handsome and agreeable that he conceiteth himself all the women who see him fall in love with him, and if you let him alone, he would run after them all till he lost his girdle. Sooth to say, he is of great assistance to me, for that none can ever seek to speak with me so secretly, but he must needs hear his share. And if it chance that I be questioned of aught, he is so fearful lest I should not know how to answer, that he straightway answereth for me both aye and no, as he judge it sortable. Footnote 313. Diminutive of contempt of Arrigo, contracted from Arriguccio, i.e. mean little Arrigo. Footnote 317. A painter of Boccaccio's time, of whom little or nothing seems to be known. Footnote 318. Perpendo lo correggia. The exact meaning of this passage is not clear. The commentators make sundry random shots at it, but, as usual, only succeed in making confusion worse confounded. It may perhaps be rendered, till his wind failed him. Now Fra Cipolla, in leaving him at the inn, had bidden him look well that none touched his gear, and more particularly his saddle-bags, for that therein were the sacred things. But Guccio, who was fonder of the kitchen than the nightingale of the green boughs, especially if he scented some serving wench there, and who had seen in that of the inn a gross fat cookmaid, undersized and ill-made, with a pair of paps that showed like two manure baskets and a face like a cadger's, all sweaty, greasy, and smoky, leaving Fra Cipolla's chamber and all his gear to care for themselves, swooped down upon the kitchen, even as the vulture swoopeth upon carrion, and seating himself by the fire. For all it was August, entered into discourse with the wench in question, whose name was Nuda, telling her that he was by rights a gentleman and had more than 9 millions of florins, beside that which he had to give others, which was rather more than less, and that he could do and say God only knew what. Moreover, without regard to his bonnet, whereon was grease enough to have seasoned the cauldron of Altapasio, and his doublet all torn and pieced, and enameled with filth about the collar and under the armpits, with more spots and patches of divers colors than ever had Turkey or India stuffs, and his shoes all broken and hose unsewn. He told her, as he had been the seer de Chatelain, that he meant to clothe her and trick her out anew and deliver her from the wretchedness of abiding with others, and bring her to hope of better fortune, if without any great wealth in possession, and many other things, which, for all he delivered them very earnestly, all turned to wind and came to naught, as did most of his enterprises. Footnote 319. Said by the commentators to have been an abbey where they made cheese soup for all comers twice a week. Hence, the cauldron of Altapasio became a proverb, but where is not the name Altapasio, high-feeding, a fancy one? Footnote 320. It does not appear to which member of this great house Boccaccio here alludes, but the Chatelains were always rich and magnificent gentlemen, from Gaucher de Chatelain, who followed Philip Augustus to the Third Crusade, to the great Admiral de Coligny. Footnote 321. Sic star con altrui, but being in the service of or dependent upon others seems to be the probable meaning. The two young men, accordingly, found Guccio busy about Nuda, whereat they were well pleased, for that it spared them half their pains, and entering Fra Cipolla's chamber, which they found open, the first thing that came under their examination was the saddle-bags wherein was the feather. In these they found, enveloped in a great taffetas wrapper, a little casket, and opening this latter, discovered therein a parrot's tail feather, which they concluded must be that which the friar had promised to show the people of Certaldo. And certes, he might lightly cause it to be believed in those days, for that the refinements of Egypt had not yet made their way save into a small part of Tuscany, as they have since done in very great abundance, to the undoing of all Italy. And wherever they may have been some little known, in those parts they were well nigh altogether unknown of the inhabitants. Nay, the rude honesty of the ancients yet enduring there, not only had they never set eyes on a parrot, but were far from having ever heard tell of such a bird. The young men, then, rejoiced at finding the feather, laid hands on it, and not to leave the casket empty, filled it with some coals they saw in a corner of the room, and shut it again. Then, putting all things in order as they had found them, they made off in high glee with the feather, without having been seen, and began to await what Fra Cipolla should say when he found the coals in place thereof. The simple men and women who were in the church, hearing that they were to see the angel Gabriel's feather afternoon, returned home as soon as Mass was over, and neighbor telling it to neighbor and gossip to gossip, no sooner had they all dined than so many men and women flocked to the burg that it would scarce hold them, all looking eagerly to see the aforesaid feather. Fra Cipolla, having well dined and after slept a while, arose a little after none, and hearing of the great multitude of country folk come to see the feather, sent to bid Guccio Imbrata come thither with the bells and bring his saddle-bags. Guccio, tearing himself with difficulty away from the kitchen and Nuda, betook himself with the things required to the appointed place, whither coming, out of breath, for that the water he had drunken had made his belly swell amain, he repaired, by his master's commandment, to the church door and fell to ringing the bells lustily. When all the people were assembled there, Fra Cipolla, without observing that aught of his had been meddled with, began his preachment, and said many words anent his affairs. After which, thinking to come to the showing of the angel Gabriel's feather, he first recited the Confiteor with the utmost solemnity, and let kindle a pair of flambeaux. Then, pulling off his bonnet, he delicately unfolded the taffeta's wrapper and brought out the casket. Having first pronounced certain ejaculations in praise and commendation of the angel Gabriel and of his relic, he opened the casket, and seeing it full of coals, suspected not Guccio Balna of having played him this trick, for that he knew him not to be man enough. Nor did he curse him for having kept ill watch lest others should do it, but silently cursed himself for having committed to him the care of his gear, knowing him, as he did, to be negligent, disobedient, careless, and forgetful. Nevertheless, without changing color, he raised his eyes and hands to heaven and said, so as to be heard of all, O God, praised be still thy puissance. Then, shutting the casket and turning to the people, gentlemen and ladies, quoth he, you must know that, whilst I was yet very young, I was dispatched by my superior to those parts where the sun riseth, and it was expressly commanded me that I should seek till I found the privileges of porcellana, which, though they cost nothing to seal, are much more useful to others than to us. On this errand I set out from Venice and passed through Borgo di Gresse, whence, riding through the kingdom of Algarve and Baldeca, I came to Pariani, and from there, not without thirst, I came after a while into Sardinia. But what booteth it to set out to you in detail all the lands explored by me? Passing the Straits of San Giorgio, I came into Truffia and Buffia, countries much inhabited and with great populations, and thence into the land of Menzogna, where I found great plenty of our brethren and of friars of other religious orders, who all went about those parts, shunning unease for the love of God, recking little of others' travail, weenas they saw their own advantage to ensue, and spending none other money than such as was uncoined. Thence I passed into the land of the Abruzzi, where the men and women go in clogs over the mountains, clothing the swine in their own guts, and a little farther I found folk who carried bread on sticks and wine in bags. From this I came to the mountains of the Bacchae, where all the waters run downhill, and in brief, I made my way so far inward that I won at last even to India Pastanaca, where I swear to you, by the habit I wear on my back, that I saw hedge-bills fly, a thing incredible to whoso hath not seen it. But if this Maso del Saggio will confirm me, whom I found there a great merchant, cracking walnuts and selling the shells by retail. Footnote 324, Quera place in Florence. One of the commentators, with characteristic carelessness, states that the place is mentioned in the preachment of Fra Cipolla, an amusing specimen of the patter sermon of the mendicant friar of the Middle Ages, that ecclesiastical cheap jack of his day, are all names of streets or places of Florence, a statement which, it is evident to the most cursory reader, is altogether inaccurate. Footnote 329, i.e. paying their way with fine words instead of coin. Footnote 331, Bacchae, drones or maggots. Pastanaca means parsnip, and is a meaningless addition of Fra Cipolla's fashion. Footnote 332, a play of words upon the primary meaning, winged things of the word pennate, hedge-bills. Being unable to find that which I went seeking, for that thence one goeth thither by water, I turned back and arrived in those holy countries, where, in summer years, cold bread is worth 4 farthings a loaf, and the hot goeth for nothing. There I found the venerable Father my Lord Blamenot Anatplesiu, the very worshipful patriarch of Jerusalem, who, for reverence of the habit I have still worn of my Lord Baron St. Anthony, would have me see all the holy relics that he had about him, and which were so many that, and I sought to recount them all to you, I should not come to an end thereof in several miles. However, not to leave you disconsolate, I will tell you some thereof. First, he showed me the finger of the Holy Ghost, as whole and sound as ever it was, and the forelock of the seraph that appeared to St. Francis, and one of the nails of the cherubim, and one of the ribs of the verbum, Caro get thee to the windows, and some of the vestments of the holy Catholic faith and divers rays of the star, that appeared to the 3 wise men in the east, and a vial of the sweat of St. Michael, ween as he fought with the devil, and the jawbone of the death of St. Lazarus and others. And for that I made him a free gift of the steeps of Monte Morello in the vernacular, and of some chapters of the Caprezio, which he had long gone seeking. He made me a sharer in his holy relics, and gave me one of the teeth of the holy rood, and somewhat of the sound of the bells of Solomon's temple in a vial and the feather of the angel Gabriel, whereof I have already bespoken you, and one of the patens of Saint Gherardo de Villa Magna, which not long since at Florence I gave to Gherardo di Bonsi, who hath a particular devotion for that saint, and he gave me also of the coals wherewith the most blessed martyr Saint Lawrence was roasted, all which things I devoutly brought home with me, and yet have. True it is that my superior hath never suffered me to show them, till such time as he should be certified if they were the very things or not. But now that, by certain miracles performed by them and by letters received from the patriarch, he hath been made certain of this, he hath granted me leave to show them. And I, fearing to trust them to others, still carry them with me. Vlesh, get thee to the windows, is only a patter tag. Now I carry the angel Gabriel's feather, so it may not be marred in one casket, and the coals wherewith Saint Lawrence was roasted in another, the which are so like one to other, that it hath often happened to me to take one for the other. And so hath it betided me at this present, for that, thinking to bring hither the casket wherein was the feather, I have brought that wherein are the coals. The which I hold not to have been an error. Nay, meseemeth certain that it was God's will, and that he himself placed the casket with the coals in my hands, especially now I mind me that the feast of Saint Lawrence is but 2 days hence. Wherefore God, willing that, by showing you the coals wherewith he was roasted, I should rekindle in your hearts the devotion it behoveth you have for him, caused me take, not the feather as I purposed, but the blessed coals extinguished by the sweat of that most holy body. So, O my blessed children, put off your bonnets and draw near devoutly to behold them. But first I would have you know that whoso is scored with these coals, in the form of the sign of the cross, may rest assured, for the whole year to come, that fire shall not touch him but he shall feel it. Having thus spoken, he opened the casket, chanting the while a canticle in praise of Saint Lawrence, and showed the coals, which after the simple multitude had a while beheld with reverent admiration, they all crowded about Fra Cipolla, and making him better offerings than they were used, besought him to touch them withal. Accordingly, taking the coals in hand, he fell to making the biggest crosses for which he could find room upon their white smocks and doublets, and upon the veils of the women, avouching that how much soever the coals diminished in making these crosses, they after grew again in the casket, as he had many a time proved. On this wise he crossed all the people of Certaldo, to his no small profit, and thus, by his ready wit and presence of mind, he baffled those who, by taking the feather from him, had thought to baffle him, and who, being present at his preachment, and hearing the rare shift employed by him, and from how far he had taken it and with what words, had so laughed that they thought to have cracked their jaws. Then, after the common folk had departed, they went up to him, and with all the mirth in the world discovered to him that which they had done, and after restored him his feather, which next year stood him in as good stead as the coals had done that day. This story afforded unto all the company alike the utmost pleasure and solace, and it was much laughed of all at Fra Cipolla, and particularly of his pilgrimage and the relics seen and brought back by him. The queen, seeing the story and likewise her sovereignty at an end, rose to her feet and put off the crown, which she set laughingly on Dionio's head, saying, "It is time, Dionio, that thou prove a while what manner charge it is to have ladies to govern and guide. Be thou, then, king and rule on such wise that in the end we may have reason to give ourselves joy of thy governance." Dionio took the crown and answered, laughing, "You may often enough have seen much better kings than I mean chess kings. But, an you obey me as a king should in truth be obeyed, I will cause you enjoy that, without which assuredly no entertainment is ever complete in its gladness. But let that talk be, I will rule as best I know." Then, sending for the seneschal, according to the wonted usance, he orderly enjoined him of that which he should do during the continuance of his seigneury, and after said, "Noble ladies, it hath in divers manners been devised of human industry, and of the various chances insomuch that, had not Dame Lysiska come hither a while agone, and found me matter with her prate for our morrow's relations, I misdoubt me, I should have been long at pains to find a subject of discourse. As you heard, she avouched that she had not a single gossip who had come to her husband a maid, and added that she knew right well how many and what manner tricks married women yet played their husbands. But letting be the first part, which is a childish matter, methinketh the second should be an agreeable subject for discourse, wherefore I will and ordain it that, Since Lysiska hath given us occasion therefore, it be discoursed tomorrow of the tricks which, or for love or for their own preservation, women have heretofore played their husbands, with or without the latter's cognizance thereof. Footnote 336. Industria in the old sense of ingenuity, skillful procurement, etc. It seemed to some of the ladies that to discourse of such a matter would ill beseem them, and they prayed him, therefore, to change the theme proposed. Wherefore answered he, Ladies, I am no less cognizant than yourselves of that which I have ordained, and that which you would fain allege to me availed not to deter me from ordaining it, considering that the times are such that, provided men and women are careful to eschew unseemly actions, all liberty of discourse is permitted. Know you not that, for the malignity of the season, the judges have forsaken the tribunals, that the laws, as well divine as human, are silent, and full license is conceded unto every one for the preservation of his life. Wherefore, if your modesty allow itself some little freedom in discourse, not with intent to ensue it with aught of unseemly indeeds, but to afford yourselves and others diversion, I see not with what plausible reason any can blame you in the future. Moreover, your company, from the first day of our assembling until this present, hath been most decorous, nor, for aught that hath been said here, doth it appear to me that its honor hath anywise been sullied. Again, who is there knoweth not your virtue? Which, not to say mirthful discourse, but even fear of death, I do not believe could avail to shake. And to tell you the truth, whosoever should hear that you shrank from devising bytimes of these toys, would be apt to suspect that you were guilty in the matter, and were therefore unwilling to discourse thereof. To say nothing of the fine honor you would do me in that, I having been obedient unto all, you now, having made me your king, seek to lay down the law to me, and not to discourse of the subject which I propose. Put off, then, this misdoubtance, apter to mean minds than to yours, and good luck to you. Let each of you bethink herself of some goodly story to tell. When the ladies heard this, they said it should be as he pleased, whereupon he gave them all leave to do their several pleasures until supper time. The sun was yet high, for that the discoursement had been brief, wherefore Dioneo having addressed himself to play at tables with the other young men, Alyssa called the other ladies apart and said to them, Since we have been here, I have still wished to carry you to a place very near at hand, whither methinketh none of you hath ever been, and which is called the Ladies' Valley, but have never yet found an occasion of bringing you thither unto today. Wherefore, as the sun is yet high, I doubt not but, an it please you come thither, you will be exceeding well pleased to have been there. They answered that they were ready, and calling one of their maids, set out upon their way, without letting the young men know aught thereof. Nor had they gone much more than a mile, when they came to the Ladies' Valley. They entered therein by a very straight way, on one side whereof ran a very clear streamlet, and saw it as fair and as delectable, especially at that season weenas the heat was great, as most might be conceived. According to that which one of them after told me, the plain that was in the valley was as round as if it had been traced with the compass, albeit it seemed the work of nature and not of art, and was in circuit a little more than half a mile, encompassed about with 6 little hills not over high, on the summit of each of which stood a palace builded in guise of a goodly castle. The sides of these hills went sloping gradually downward to the plain on such wise as we see in amphitheaters. The degrees descend in ordered succession from the highest to the lowest, still contracting their circuit. And of these slopes, those which looked toward the south were all full of vines and olives and almonds and cherries and figs, and many another kind of fruit-bearing trees, without a span thereof being wasted. Whilst those which faced the North Star were all covered with thickets of dwarf oaks and ashes, and other trees as green and straight as might be. The middle plain, which had no other inlet than that whereby the ladies were come thither, was full of firs and cypresses and laurels and various sorts of pines, as well arrayed and ordered as if the best artist in that kind had planted them. And between these little or no sun, even at its highest, made its way to the ground, which was all one meadow of very fine grass, thick sown with flowers purpurine and others. Moreover, that which afforded no less delight than otherwhat was a little stream, which ran down from a valley that divided 2 of the hills aforesaid, and falling over cliffs of live rock, made a murmur very delectable to hear. What while it showed from afar, as it broke over the stones, like so much quicksilver jetting out, under pressure of somewhat, into fine spray. As it came down into the little plain, it was there received into a fair channel, and ran very swiftly into the midst thereof, where it formed a lakelet, such as the townsfolk made whiles, by way of fish pond, in their gardens, weenas they have a commodity thereof. This lakelet was no deeper than a man's stature, breast high, and its waters being exceeding clear and altogether untroubled with any admixture. It showed its bottom to be of a very fine gravel, the grains whereof whoso had naught else to do might, and he would, have availed to number. Nor, looking into the water, was the bottom alone to be seen, nay, but so many fish fleeting hither and thither that, over and above the pleasure thereof, it was a marvel to behold. Nor was it enclosed with other banks than the very soil of the meadow, which was the goodlier thereabout in so much as it received the more of its moisture. The water that abounded over and above the capacity of the lake was received into another channel, whereby, issuing forth of the little valley, it ran off into the lower parts. Footnote 338, lit. The northern chariot, Caro di Tramontana, quere the Great Bear. Hither then came the young ladies, and after they had gazed all about and much commended the place, they took counsel together to bathe, for that the heat was great, and that they saw the lakelet before them and were in no fear of being seen. Accordingly, bidding their serving maid abide over against the way, whereby one entered there, and look if any should come and give them notice thereof, they stripped themselves naked, all 7, and entered the lake, which hid their white bodies no otherwise than as a thin glass would do with a vermeil rose. Then, they being therein, and no troubling of the water ensuing thereof, they fell, as best they might, to faring hither and thither in pursuit of the fish, which had uneath where to hide themselves, and seeking to take them with the naked hand. After they had abidden a while in such joyous pastime, and had taken some of the fish, they came forth of the lakelet, and clad themselves anew. Then, unable to commend the place more than they had already done, and them seeming time to turn homeward, they set out, with soft step, upon their way, discoursing much of the goodliness of the valley. They reached the palace betimes, and there found the young men yet at play where they had left them, to whom quoth Pampinea, laughing, "We have e'en stolen a march on you today." "How?" asked Dioneo. "Do you begin to do deeds ere you come to say words?" "Aye, my lord," answered she, and related to him at large whence they came, and how the place was fashioned, and how far distant thence, and that which they had done. The king, hearing tell of the goodliness of the place and desirous of seeing it, caused straightway order the supper, which being dispatched to the general satisfaction, the 3 young men, leaving the ladies, betook themselves with their servants to the valley, and having viewed it in every part, for that none of them had ever been there before, extolled it for one of the goodliest things in the world. Then, for that it grew late, after they had bathed and donned their clothes, they returned home, where they found the ladies dancing around, to the accompaniment of a song sung by Fiammetta. Footnote 339, alluding to the subject fixed for the next day's discourse, as who should say, "Have you begun already to play tricks upon us men in very deed, ere you tell about them in words?" The dance ended, they entered with them into a discourse of the ladies' valley, and said much in praise and commendation thereof. Moreover, the king, sending for the seneschal, bade him look that the dinner be made ready there on the following morning, and have sundry beds carried thither, in case any should have a mind to lie or sleep there for nooning. After which he let bring lights and wine and confections, and the company having somedel refreshed themselves, he commanded that all should address themselves to dancing. Then, Pamphilo having, at his commandment, set up a dance, the king turned to Alyssa and said courteously to her, "Fair damsel, thou hast today done me the honor of the crown, and I purpose this evening to do thee that of the song. Wherefore look thou sing such an one as most liketh thee." Alyssa answered, smiling, that she would well, and with dulcet voice began on this wise. "Love, from thy clutches could I but win free, hardly, methinks, again shall any other hook take hold on me. I entered in thy wars a youngling maid, thinking thy strife was utmost peace and sweet, and all my weapons on the ground I laid, as one secure, undoubting of defeat. But thou, false tyrant, with rapacious heat, didst fall on me amain with all the grapnels of thine armory. Then, wound about and fettered with thy chains, to him, who for my death in evil hour was born, thou gav'st me, bounden, full of pains and bitter tears. And sign within his power, he hath me and his rules so harsh and dour no sighs can move the swain, nor all my wasting plaints to set me free. My prayers, the wild winds bear them all away. He hearkeneth unto none, and none will hear. Wherefore each hour my torment waxeth I cannot die, albeit life irks me drear. Ah, Lord, have pity on my heavy cheer do that I seek in vain, and give him bounden in thy chains to me. And this thou wilt not, at the least undo the bonds iruhin of hope that knitted were, alack, O Lord, thereof to thee I sue for, and thou do it, yet to waxen fair again I trust, as was my use whiler. And being quit of pain myself with white flowers and with red besee. Elissa ended her song with a very plaintive sigh, and albeit all marveled at the words thereof, yet was there none who might conceive what it was that caused her sing thus. But the king, who was in a merry mood, calling for Tindaro, bade him bring out his bagpipes, to the sound whereof he let dance many dances. After which, a great part of the night being now past, he bade each go sleep. Here Audiobook, the 6th day of the Decameron. Day the 7th. Here Giovanni, the 7th day of the Decameron, wherein under the governance of Dioneo, is discoursed of the tricks which or for love or for their own preservation. Women have heretofore played their husbands with or, without the latter's cognizance thereof. Every star was already fled from the parts of the east, save only that which we style Lucifer, and which shone yet in the whitening dawn, when the seneschal, arising, betook himself, with a great baggage train, to the Ladies' Valley, there to order everything, according to commandment had of his lord. The king, whom the noise of the packers and of the beasts had awakened, tarried not long after his departure to rise, and being risen, caused arouse all the ladies and likewise the young men. Nor had the rays of the sun yet well broken forth, when they all entered upon the road. Never yet had the nightingales and the other birds seemed to them to sing so blithely as they did that morning. What while, accompanied by their carols, they repaired to the Ladies' Valley, where they were received by many more, which seemed to them to make merry for their coming. There, going round about the place, and reviewing it all anew, it appeared to them so much fairer than on the foregoing day, as the season of the day was more sorted to its goodliness. Then, after they had broken their fast with good wine and confections, not to be behindhand with the birds in the matter of song, they fell a-singing, and the valley with them, still echoing those same songs which they did sing, whereto all the birds, as if they would not be outdone, added new and dulcet notes. Presently, the dinner hour being come, and the tables spread hard by the fair lakelet under the thick-set laurels and other goodly trees, they seated themselves there, as it pleased the king, and eating, watched the fish swim in vast shoals about the lake, which gave bytimes occasion for talk as well as observation. When they had made an end of dining, and the meats and tables were removed, they fell anew to singing more blithely than ever. After which, beds having been spread in various places about the little valley, and all enclosed about by the discreet seneschal with curtains and canopies of French serge, whoso would might with the king's permission, go sleep. Whilst those who had no mind to sleep might at there, will take pleasure of their other wonted pastimes. But after a while, all being now arisen and the hour come when they should assemble together for story-telling, carpets were, at the king's commandment, spread upon the grass, not far from the place where they had eaten, and all having seated themselves thereon hard by the lake, the king bade Emilia begin. Whereupon she blithely proceeded to speak, smiling thus. The first story. Gianni, Lottranghi, Heareth, knock at his door by night and awakeneth his wife, who giveth him to believe that it is a phantom. Whereupon they go to exorcise it with a certain orison, and the knocking casth. My lord, it had been very agreeable to me, were such your pleasure, that other than I should have given a beginning to so goodly a matter as is that whereof we are to speak. But, since it pleaseth you that I give all the other ladies assurance by my example, I will gladly do it. Moreover, dearest ladies, I will study to tell a thing that may be useful to you in time to come, for that, if you others are as fearful as I, and especially of phantoms, though what manner of thing they may be God knoweth I know not, nor ever found I any woman who knew it, albeit all are alike adreed of them. You may, by noting well my story, learn a holy and goodly orison of great virtue for the conjuring them away, should they come to you. There was once in Florence, in the quarter of San Brancasio, a wool-comer called Giovanni Boccaccio, a man more fortunate in his craft than wise in other things. For that, savoring of the simpleton, he was very often made captain of the laud singers of Santa Maria Novella and had the governance of their confraternity, and he many a time had other little offices of the same kind, upon which he much valued himself. This betided him for that, being a man of substance, he gave many a good pittance to the clergy, who, getting of him often this a pair of hose, that a gown and another a scapulary, taught him in return store of goodly orisons and gave him the paternoster in the vulgar tongue, the song of Saint Alexis, the lamentations of Saint Bernard, the canticles of Madame Matilda and the like trumpery, all which he held very dear and kept very diligently for his soul's health. Now he had a very fair and lovesome lady to wife, by name Mistress Tessa, who was the daughter of Manuccio dalla Caculia and was exceeding discreet and well advised. She, knowing her husband's simplicity, and being enamored of Federigo di Neri Pegalotti, a brisk and handsome youth, and he of her, took order with a serving maid of hers that he should come speak with her at a very goodly country house, which her husband had at Camerida, where she sojourned all the summer and whither Giovanni came whiles to sup and sleep, returning in the morning to his shop and bytimes to his laud singers. Federigo, who desired this beyond measure, taking his opportunity, repaired thither on the day appointed him towards vespers, and Giovanni not coming thither that evening, supped and lay the night in all ease and delight with the lady, who, being in his arms, taught him that night a good half-dozen of her husband's lauds. Then, neither she nor Federigo purposing that this should be the last, as it had been the first time, they took order together on this wise, so it should not be needful to send the maid for him each time, to wit, that every day, as he came and went to, and from a place he had a little farther on, he should keep his eye on a vineyard that adjoined the house, where he would see an ass's skull set up on one of the vine poles, which ween as he saw with the muzzle turned towards Florence. He should without fail and in all assurance betake himself to her that evening after dark, and if he found the door shut, he should knock softly thrice and she would open to him. But that, ween as he saw the ass's muzzle turned towards Fiesole, he should not come, for that Giovanni would be there. And doing on this wise, they foregathered many a time. But once, amongst other times, it chanced that, Federigo being one night to sup with Mistress Tessa, and she having let cook 2 fat capons, Giovanni, who was not expected there that night, came thither very late, whereat the lady was much chagrined, and having supped with her husband on a piece of salt pork, which she had let boil apart, caused the maid wrap the 2 boiled capons in a white napkin and carry them, together with good store of new-laid eggs and a flask of good wine, into a garden she had, whither she could go, without passing through the house, and where she was wont to sup whiles with her lover, bidding her lay them at the foot of a peach tree that grew beside a lawn there. But such was her trouble and annoy that she remembered not to bid the maid wait till Federigo should come and tell him that Giovanni was there, and that he should take the viands from the garden. Wherefore, she and Giovanni betaking themselves to bed, and the maid likewise, it was not long before Federigo came to the door and knocked softly once. The door was so near to the bedchamber that Giovanni heard it incontinent, as also did the lady. But she made a show of being asleep, so her husband might have no suspicion of her. After waiting a little, Federigo knocked a second time, whereupon Giovanni, marveling, nudged his wife somewhat and said, "Tessa, hearest thou what I hear? Meseemeth, there is a knocking at our door." The lady, who had heard it much better than he, made a show of awaking and said, "Eh? How say'st thou?" "I say," answered Giovanni, "that meseemeth there is a knocking at our door." "Knocking?" cried she. "Alack, Giovanni mine, knowst thou not what it is? It is a phantom, that hath these last few nights given me the greatest fright that ever was, insomuch that, ween as I hear it, I put my head under the clothes and dare not bring it out again until it is broad day." Quoth Giovanni, "Go to, wife, have no fear if it be so. For I said the Te Lucis and the Intemerata and such other pious orisons before we lay down, and crossed the bed from side to side, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, so that we have no need to fear, for that, what power soever it have, it cannot avail to harm us." The lady, fearing lest Federigo should perchance suspect otherwhat and be angered with her, determined at all hazards to arise and let him know that Giovanni was there. Wherefore quoth she to her husband, "That is all very well, thou say'st thy words thou, but for my part I shall never hold myself safe nor secure, except we exorcise it, since thou art here. And how is it to be exorcised? Asked he and she, I know full well how to exorcise it. For the other day, when I went to the pardon at Fesol, a certain anchoress, the very holiest of creatures, Giovanni mine, God only can say how holy she is, seeing me thus fearful, taught me a pious and effectual orison, and told me that she had made trial of it several times, ere she became a recluse, and that it had always availed her. God knoweth I should never have dared go alone to make proof of it, but now that thou art here, I would have us go exorcise the phantom. Giovanni answered that he would well, and accordingly they both arose and went softly to the door, without which Federigo, who now began to misdoubt him of somewhat, was yet in waiting. When they came thither, the lady said to Giovanni, Do thou spit, weenas I shall bid thee. And he answered, Good. Then she began the conjuration and said, Phantom, phantom that goest by night, with tail upright thou camest to us, now get thee gone with tail upright. Begone into the garden to the foot of the great peach tree. There shalt thou find an anointed, twice anointed one and 100 turds of my sitting hen. Set thy mouth to the flagon and get thee gone again, and do thou no hurt to my Giovanni nor to me. Then to her husband, Spit, Giovanni, quoth she, and he spat. Federigo, who heard all this from without and was now quit of jealousy, had, for all his vexation, so great a mind to laugh that he was like to burst, and when Giovanni spat, he said under his breath, Thy teeth. The lady, having thrice conjured the phantom on this wise, returned to bed with her husband, whilst Federigo, who had not supped, looking to sup with her, and had right well apprehended the words of the conjuration, betook himself to the garden, and finding the capons and wine and eggs at the foot of the great peach tree, carried them off to his house, and there supped at his ease. And after, when he next foregathered with the lady, he had a hearty laugh with her anent the conjuration aforesaid. Some say indeed that the lady had actually turned the ass's skull towards Fesol, but that a husbandman, passing through the vineyard, had given it a blow with a stick and caused it spin round, and it had become turned towards Florence, wherefore Federigo, thinking himself summoned, had come thither, and that the lady had made the conjuration on this wise. Phantom, phantom, get thee gone in God's name, for it was not I turned the ass's head, but another it was, God put him to shame. And I am here with my Giovanni in bed, whereupon he went away, and abode without supper or lodging. But a neighbor of mine, a very ancient lady, telleth me that, according to that which she heard, when a child, both the one and the other were true. But that the latter happened, not to Giovanni Lottaringhi, but to one Giovanni di Nello, who abode at Porta San Piero, and was no less exquisite a ninny than the other. Wherefore, dear my ladies, it abideth at your election to take whether of the two orisons most pleaseth you, except you will have both. They have great virtue in such cases, as you have had proof in the story you have heard. Get them, therefore, by heart, and they may yet avail you. The second story. Pieronilale hidth, a lover of hers in a vat, upon her husband's unlooked-for return, and hearing from the latter that he hath sold the vat, aviousith herself to have sold it to one who is presently thwithin, to see if it be sound. Whereupon the gallant, jumping out of the vat, causith the husband scrape it out for him, and after carry it home to his house. Emilia's story was received with loud laughter, and the conjuration commended of all as goodly and excellent. And this come to an end, the king bade Philostrato follow on, who accordingly began, Dearest ladies, so many are the tricks that men, and particularly husbands, play you, that if some woman chance whilst to put a cheat upon her husband, you should not only be blithe that this hath happened and take pleasure in coming to know it or hearing it told of any, but should yourselves go telling it everywhere, so men may understand that, if they are knowing, women, on their part, are no less so. The which cannot be other than useful unto you, for that, when one knoweth that another is on the alert, he setteth himself not over lightly to cozen him. Who, then, can doubt but that which we shall say today concerning this matter, coming to be known of men, may be exceeding effectual in restraining them from cozening you ladies, weenas they find that you likewise know how to cozen, and you will. I purpose, therefore, to tell you the trick which, on the spur of the moment, a young woman, albeit she was of mean condition, played her husband for her own preservation. In Naples no great while agone there was a poor man who took to wife a fair and lovesome damsel called Peronella, and albeit he with his craft, which was that of a mason, and she by spinning, earned but a slender pittance, they ordered their life as best they might. It chanced one day that a young gallant of the neighborhood saw this Pampinea, and she pleasing him mightily. He fell in love with her, and importuned her one way and another, till he became familiar with her, and they took order with each other on this wise, so they might be together. To wit, seeing that her husband arose every morning betimes to go to work or to find work, they agreed that the young man should be whereas he might see him go out, and that, as soon as he was gone, the street where she abode, which was called Avorio, being very solitary, he should come to her house. On this wise they did many times. But one morning the good man having gone out and Janello Strignario, for so was the lover named, having entered the house and being with Pampinea, it chanced that after a while the husband returned home, whereas it was his wont to be abroad all day, and finding the door locked within, knocked and after fell a-saying in himself, O my God, praised be thou ever. For though thou hast made me poor, at least thou hast comforted me with a good and honest damsel to wife. See how she locked the door within as soon as I was gone out, so none might enter to do her any annoy. Pampinea, knowing her husband by his way of knocking, said to her lover, Alack, Janello mine, I am a dead woman. For here is my husband, whom God confound, come back, and I know not what this meaneth, for never yet came he back hither at this hour. Belike he saw thee weenas thou enteredst here. But for the love of God, however the case may be, get thee into yonder vat, whilst I go open to him, and we shall see what is the meaning of his returning home so early this morning. Accordingly, Janello betook himself in all haste into the vat, whilst Pampinea, going to the door, opened to her husband and said to him, with an angry air, What is to do now, that thou returnest home so soon this morning? Meseemeth thou hast a mind to do naught today, that I see thee come back, tools in hand. And if thou do thus, on what are we to live? Whence shall we get bread? Thinkest thou I will suffer thee pawn my gown, and my other poor clothes? I, who do nothing but spin day and night, till the flesh is come apart from my nails, so I may at the least have so much oil as will keep our lamp burning. Husband, husband, there is not a neighbor's wife of ours, but marvelleth thereat and maketh mock of me for the pains I give myself, and all that I endure. And thou returnest home to me, with thy hands a-dangle, weenas thou shouldst be at work. So saying, she fell a-weeping and went on to say, Alack, woe is me, unhappy woman that I am. In what an ill hour was I born, at what an ill moment did I come hither. I who might have had a young man of such worth, and would none of him, so I might come to this fellow here, who taketh no thought to her whom he hath brought home. Other women give themselves a good time with their lovers, for there is none but hath two and some three, and they enjoy themselves, and show their husbands the moon for the sun. But I wretch that I am. Because I am good and occupy myself not with such toys, I suffer ill and ill hap. I know not why I do not take me a lover, as do other women. Understand well, husband mine, that had I a mind to do ill, I could soon enough find the wherewithal, for there be store of brisk young fellows who love me and wish me well and have sent to me, proffering money galore or dresses and jewels at my choice. But my heart would never suffer me to do it, for that I was no mother's daughter of that ilk. And here thou comest home to me, weenas thou shouldst be at work. Good lack, wife, answered the husband, fret not thyself, for God's sake. Thou shouldst be assured that I know what manner of woman thou art, and indeed this morning I have in part had proof thereof. It is true that I went out to go to work, but it seemeth thou knowest not, as I myself knew not, that this is the feast day of San Galone and there is no work doing. That is why I am come back at this hour. But none the less I have provided and found a means how we shall have bread for more than a month, for I have sold yonder man thou seest here with me the vat which, as thou knowest, hath this long while cumbered the house, and he is to give me 5 lily florins for it. Quoth Pampinea, so much the more cause have I to complain, thou, who art a man and goest about and should be versed in the things of the world, thou hast sold a vat for 5 florins, whilst I, a poor silly woman who hath scarce ever been without the door, seeing the hindrance it gave us in the house, have sold it for 7 to an honest man, who entered it but now as thou camest back, to see if it were sound. When the husband heard this, he was more than satisfied, and said to him who had come for the vat, Good man, be gone in peace, for thou hearest that my wife hath sold the vat for 7 florins, whereas thou wast to give me but 5 for it. Good, replied the other, and went his way, Whereupon quoth Peronella to her husband, Since thou art here, come up and settle with him thyself. Janello, who abode with his ears pricked up to hear if it behoved him fear or be on his guard against aught, hearing his mistress's words, straightway scrambled out of the vat and cried out, as if he had heard nothing of the husband's return, Where art thou, good wife? Whereupon the goodman, coming up, answered, Here am I, what wouldst thou have? Who art thou? asked Janello. I want the woman with whom I made the bargain for this vat. Quoth the other, You may deal with me in all assurance, for I am her husband. Then said Janello, The vat appeareth to me sound enough, but meseemeth you have kept dregs or the like therein, for it is all overcrusted with I know not what that is so hard and dry that I cannot remove aught thereof with my nails, wherefore I will not take it, except I first see it clean. Nay, answered Peronella, the bargain shall not fall through for that. My husband will clean it all out. I, rejoined the latter, and laying down his tools, put off his coat. Then, calling for a light and a scraper, he entered the vat and fell to scraping. Peronella, as if she had a mind to see what he did, thrust her head and one of her arms, shoulder and all, in at the mouth of the vat, which was not overbig, and fell to saying, Scrape here and there also, and see, here is a little left. Footnote 344, so called from the figure of a lily stamped on the coin, cf. Our rose nobles. Whilst she was thus engaged in directing her husband, and showing him where to scrape Janello, who had scarce, yet that morning, done his full desire, when they were interrupted by the mason's coming, seeing that he could not as he would, bethought himself to accomplish it as he might. Wherefore, boarding her, as she held the mouth of the vat all closed up, on such wise as in the ample plains the unbridled stallions, afire with love, assail the mares of Parthia, he satisfied his juvenile ardor, the which enterprise was brought to perfection well nigh at the same moment as the scraping of the vat. Whereupon he dismounted, and Peronella withdrawing her head from the mouth of the vat, the husband came forth thereof. Then said she to her gallant, Take this light, good man, and look if it be clean to thy mind. Janello looked in and said that it was well and that he was satisfied, and giving the husband 7 florins, caused carry the vat to his own house. The third story. Fra Rinaldo Lieth, with his gossip, and being found of her husband closeted with her in her chamber. They give him to believe that he was in act to conjure worms from his godson. Philostrato had not known to speak so obscurely of the mares of Parthia, but that the roguish ladies laughed thereat, making believe to laugh at other what. But when the king saw that his story was ended, he bade Alyssa tell, who accordingly, with obedient readiness, began, Charming ladies, Emilia's conjuration of the phantom hath brought to my memory the story of another conjuration, which latter, though it be not so goodly as hers, nevertheless, for that none other bearing upon our subject occurreth to me at this present, I will proceed to relate. You must know that there was once in Siena a very agreeable young man and of a worshipful family, by name Rinaldo, who was passionately enamored of a very beautiful lady, a neighbor of his and the wife of a rich man, and flattered himself that, could he but find means to speak with her unsuspected, he might avail to have of her all that he should desire. Seeing none other way, and the lady being great with child, he bethought himself to become her gossip, and accordingly, clapping up an acquaintance with her husband, he offered him, on such wise as appeared to him most seemly, to be godfather to his child. His offer was accepted, and he being now become Madame Agnes's gossip, and having a somewhat more colorable excuse for speaking with her, he took courage and gave her in so many words to know that of his intent which she had indeed long before gathered from his looks. But little did this profit him, although the lady was nothing displeased to have heard him. Not long after, whatever might have been the reason, it came to pass that Rinaldo turned friar, and whether or not he found the pastorage to his liking, he persevered in that way of life. And albeit, in the days of his becoming a monk, he had for a while laid on one side the love he bore his gossip, together with sundry other vanities of his. Yet, in process of time, without quitting the monk's habit, he resumed them and began to delight in making a show and wearing fine stuffs, and being dainty and elegant in all his fashions, and making canzonets and sonnets and ballads, and in singing and all manner other things of the like sort. But what say I of our Fra Rinaldo, of whom we speak? What monks are there that do not thus? Alack, shame that they are of the corrupt world, They blush not to appear fat and ruddy in the face, dainty in their garb and in all that pertaineth unto them, and strut along, not like doves, but like very turkey-cocks, with crest erect and breast puffed out. And what is worse, to say nothing of having their cells full of gallipots crammed with electuaries and unguents, of boxes full of various confections, of phials and flagons of distilled waters and oils, of pitchers brimming with malmsey and cypress and other wines of price, insomuch that they seem to the beholder not friars' cells, but rather apothecaries' or perfumers' shops. They think no shame that folk should know them to be gouty, conceiving that others see not nor know that strict fasting. Coarse viands and spare and sober living make men lean and slender, and for the most part sound of body, and that if indeed some sicken thereof, at least they sicken not of the gout, whereto it is used to give, for medicine, chastity, and everything else that pertaineth to the natural way of living of an honest friar. Yet they persuade themselves that others know not that, let alone the scant and sober living, long vigils, praying, and discipline should make men pale and mortified, and that neither Saint Dominic nor Saint Francis, far from having 4 gowns for one, clad themselves in cloth dyed in grain nor in other fine stuffs, but in garments of coarse wool and undyed, to keep out the cold and not to make a show. For which things, as well as for the souls of the simpletons who nourish them, there is need that God provide. Fra Rinaldo, then, having returned to his former appetites, began to pay frequent visits to his gossip, and waxing in assurance, proceeded to solicit her with more than his former instancy to that which he desired of her. The good lady, seeing herself hard-pressed, and Fra Rinaldo seeming to her belike goodlier than she had thought him aforetime, being one day sore importuned of him, had recourse to that argument which all women use who have a mind to yield that which is asked of them, and said, "How now, Fra Rinaldo? Do monks such things?" "Madam," answered he, "when as I shall have this gown off my back, and I can put it off mighty easily, I shall appear to you a man fashioned like other men and not a monk." The lady pulled a demure face and said, "Alack, wretched me! You are my gossip, how can I do this? It were sadly ill, and I have heard many a time that it is a very great sin. But certes, were it not for this, I would do that which you wish." Quoth Fra Rinaldo, "You are a simpleton, if you forbear for this. I do not say that it is not a sin, but God pardoneth greater than this to whoso repenteth. But tell me, who is more akin to your child, I who held him at baptism, or your husband who begat him?" "My husband is more akin to him," answered the lady. "Whereupon, you say sooth," rejoined the friar. "And doth not your husband lie with you?" "Aye doth he," replied she. "Then," said Fra Rinaldo, "I, who am less akin to your child than is your husband, may lie with you even as doth he." The lady, who knew no logic and needed little persuasion, either believed or made a show of believing that the friar spoke the truth, and answered, "Who might avail to answer your learned words?" And after, notwithstanding the gossipship, she resigned herself to do his pleasure. Nor did they content themselves with one bout, but foregathered many and many a time, having the more commodity thereof under cover of the gossipship, for that there was less suspicion. But once, amongst other times, it befell that Fra Rinaldo, coming to the lady's house and finding none with her but a little maid of hers, who was very pretty and agreeable, dispatched his comrade with the latter to the pigeon loft, to teach her her paternoster, and entered with the lady, who had her child in her hand, into her bedchamber, where they locked themselves in, and fell to taking their pleasure upon a daybed that was there. As they were thus engaged, it chanced that the husband came home, and making for the bedchamber door, unperceived of any, knocked and called to the lady, who, hearing this, said to the friar, "I am a dead woman, for here is my husband, and now he will certainly perceive what is the reason of our familiarity." Now Rinaldo was stripped to his waistcoat, to wit, he had put off his gown and his scapulary, and hearing this answered, "You say sooth, were I but dressed, there might be some means, but if you open to him and he find me thus, there can be no excuse for us." The lady, seized with a sudden idea, said, "Hark, dress yourself, and when you are dressed, take your godchild in your arms, and hearken well to that which I shall say to him, so your words may after accord with mine, and leave me do." Then to the good man, who had not yet left knocking, "I come to thee," quoth she, and rising, opened the chamber door, and said, with a good countenance, "Husband mine, I must tell thee that Fra Rinaldo, our gossip, is come hither, and it was God sent him to us, for, certes, but for his coming, we should today have lost our child." The good simple man, hearing this, was like to swoon and said, "How so?" "O husband mine," answered Agnesa, "there took him but now of a sudden a fainting fit, that methought he was dead, and I knew not what to do or say. But just then Fra Rinaldo our gossip came in, and taking him in his arms, said, Gossip, these be worms he hath in his body, the which draw near to his heart and would infallibly kill him. But have no fear, for I will conjure them and make them all die. And ere I go hence, you shall see the child whole again as ever you saw him. And for that we had need of thee to repeat certain orisons, and that the maid could not find thee. He caused his comrades say them in the highest room of our house, whilst he and I came hither and locked ourselves in, so none should hinder us, for that none other than the child's mother might be present at such an office. Indeed, he hath the child yet in his arms, and methinketh he waiteth, but for his comrade to have made an end of saying the orisons, and it will be done, for that the boy is already altogether restored to himself. The good simple man, believing all this, was so straitened with concern for his child that it never entered his mind to suspect the cheat put upon him by his wife. But heaving a great sigh, he said, I will go see him. Nay, answered she, thou wouldst mar that which hath been done. Wait, I will go see, and thou mayst come in and call thee. Meanwhile, Fra Rinaldo, who had heard everything and had dressed himself at his leisure, took the child in his arms and called out, as soon as he had ordered matters to his mind, saying, Hark I, gossip, hear I not my gossip your husband there? Aye, sir, answered the simpleton. Whereupon, then, said the other, come hither. The cuckold went to him, and Fra Rinaldo said to him, Take your son by the grace of God whole and well, whereas I deemed, but now you would not see him alive at vespers. And look you let make a waxen image of his bigness, and set it up, to the praise and glory of God, before the statue of our Lord St. Ambrose, through whose intercession he hath vouchsafed to restore him unto you. The child, seeing his father, ran to him and caressed him, as little children used to do, whilst the latter, taking him, weeping, in his arms, no otherwise than as he had brought him forth of the grave, fell to kissing him and returning thanks to his gossip for that he had made him whole. Meanwhile, Fra Rinaldo's comrade, who had by this taught the serving wench not one, but maybe more than 4 paternosters, and had given her a little purse of white thread, which he had from a nun, and made her his devotee, hearing the cuckold call at his wife's chamber door, had softly betaken himself to a place whence he could, himself unseen, both see and hear what should betide, and presently, seeing that all had passed off well, came down and entering the chamber, said, Fra Rinaldo, I have dispatched all 4 of the orisons which you bade me say. Brother mine, answered the friar, thou hast a good wind and hast done well. I for my part had said but 2 thereof when my gossip came. But God the Lord, what with thy pains and mine, hath shown us such favor that the child is healed. Therewithal the cuckold let bring good wines and confections, and entertained his gossip and the latter's comrade with that whereof they had more need than of aught else. Then, attending them to the door, he commended them to God, and letting make the waxen image without delay. He sent to hang it up with the others before the statue of St. Ambrose, but not that of Milan. Footnote 347. There is apparently some satirical allusion here, which I cannot undertake to explain.